Hey everyone, Adam Kanakin here with the ILET Network, here on the Tactical Breakdown podcast with Chip Huth, who is the 2020 ILEETA Instructor of the Year, and we're here obviously at the ILEETA 2021 conference. Little weird. Chip, thanks for joining me, brother.
Oh man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm honored to get to sit down across from you. Instructor of the Year here at ILEETA is a pretty big deal. If you look at the list of names that have come before you, it's kind of the who's who of law enforcement instructors. What does it mean to you to be honored like that?
Yeah, well, just that. I mean, it's just to be in that company, and the fact that those past instructors of the year are the ones primarily responsible for selecting me. I mean, that says a lot. I mean, to be upheld by your peers as someone worthy of a recognition like that. I mean, what do you say, right? I mean, I'm very, very honored.
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome. You know, during opening ceremonies, obviously we got to see. You know, it's funny, you walk up there, man, a few words, but when you sit in your classes, I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge and experience, and you're actually teaching here at the conference this week. What is it that you're talking about, and why is it so important that we teach that to instructors?
Yes, well, you know, so thanks for the interest. This year at ILEETA, I'm talking about leadership again. It's a favorite topic of mine. The class is the 7 traits of effective leaders, and we distinguish between what makes leaders effective versus ineffective, and just kind of narrowed it down to 7 broad traits. Obviously, there are many more traits than that, but 7 traits that I find to be extremely important. There's like a common theme that you see with effective leaders. I try to extract as much knowledge as we can from those folks and put it together in a deliverable, share it with other instructors so that they might be able to take that information and incorporate it into their programs, into their way of being, and into their methodology.
And I think that really takes on different components too when you talk about training instructors, because part of it is you're training the instructor to give them that tools and those understanding about what a good leader is, which is what an instructor is. You're a leader. But also so that they can instill those same leadership qualities onto the officers that they're training, and then the officers can become a leader in their community. So is that something that you touch on when you're going through your course?
Yeah. So I'm very big on practical wisdom, practical knowledge. I mean, if you can't use what you know, I mean, I'm a philosopher, but I don't care too much about navel gazing. I care about philosophy that can be applied to your life, to, you know, as you move through life, tools and ways of seeing the world that you can leverage to actually make improvements, right? To actually help other people transcend their current situation, right? I mean, you know, so that's what it's all about for these trainers. Is they're trying to impart new knowledge. They're trying to impart knowledge to people who, you know, knowledge that they'll be able to use, again, to effectively meet the challenges that they're faced with in their lives. And that's certainly the kind of teaching that I like to engage in.
Yeah. I want to talk leadership with you because that's what you know, I know you're passionate about it. For me, I mean, for those who watch the podcast know, like, I was an infantry officer with the Canadian Forces, and that was the challenges of being a young leader, especially, are it's interesting to say the least. And there's a lot of learning that has to be done. I had my fair share of those moments. When we talk leadership, you say there's 7 components. Let's go over them briefly. Let's let you share a bit about your thoughts on each of them.
Yeah, well, so, and again, there are more than 7 components,
right,
obviously, and I can sympathize a lot with you when it comes to young leadership failures. I mean, I currently have, even though I'm not a young leader anymore, I currently still have failures. I mean, we all do. It isn't about, people think about leadership like, well, one day I'll arrive at this point where I'll be this great leader, and really that's not true. You know, leadership, it's a path, it's a journey. We're all engaged in it, and sometimes we're going to slip off to one side or the other. So just being willing to stay in the practice. Leadership, you can think of it like a practice. We're practicing leadership. And so you think about the traits. You know, the first trait I talk about is seeing people. Effective leaders see people. And that's the most important trait. That's why we talk about it first. Because if you can't get that right, if you can't manage to understand and interact with folks as they truly are, as people, with hopes, needs, fears, dreams, desires, all those things that constitute humanity, then everything else you do, any other tactic you employ, any other value you espouse, it's going to fall short. And so what we mean by seeing people is we tend to have a habit of objectifying others It's just something we do, maybe as a byproduct of our egocentrism as human beings, but we tend to see people only in terms of how they're useful to us. You could think about going through a checkout line at a grocery store and maybe not engaging with the clerk. Maybe you're on your cell phone, you're just swiping your credit card, you're getting your purchases and leaving, without really having a human exchange with that person. And in that scenario, that would be illustrative of seeing that person as an object, a tool, a vehicle to get what you want and nothing more. That's how it might manifest, right? But you can see in leadership we do that all the time too when we think about the people that report to us as like chess pieces. I need a body to fill this slot, and I'm not concerned particularly at my worst moments about what that individual's specific aptitudes or needs might be. I'm just not honoring that about them. I'm just thinking about them in terms of where I can plug them in. And you just can't get the maximum amount of effectiveness out of your leadership when you're doing that. So people respond not only to what you do, but how they're feeling seen by you when you're doing it. So ensuring that you're seeing them as a person is just, it's so important. So that's the first thing, and I'm telling you, that's the hardest thing, because again, we vacillate often. We have an inward mindset, as we say in Arbinger's work, where I'm completely self-focused on just what I need, to an outward mindset where I'm others inclusive. I think not only about what I need, but what other people need. And I adjust my efforts as a leader in a way that allows me to accomplish my goals while honoring the fact that other people have things that matter to them too. That'd be one way of thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that. Seeing the person for who they are. That's, it's interesting. That was one thing when, I got in and I got my platoon. The one thing that the CO said to me was, get to know your men. Get to know your men. That's your job.
Yeah.
Your job is to know them.
Yeah.
Your NCOs, your warrant, your sergeants, they'll take care of the other stuff. You don't know that yet. Your job is to look after your men and know who they are. And that, as soon as you were talking about that, I was just like, just flashbacks, right? So yeah, I think that's super important.
Yeah, but it's incredible. And actually it's the relationships that you build as that team leader that you're going to end up leveraging to get the mission accomplished. You're not after just mere compliance on the part of your direct reports. You want them to really buy into the mission, right? They need to be invested in it in such a way as if you give them your intent and something falls apart with the program, right? Something changes in the environment, they have to call an audible. They still understand your intent. They're still invested in the mission. They're not just carrying out your orders blindly. They feel seen by you, understood by you. There's great team ability. Again, they can pivot as needed and still accomplish the mission. I mean, again, we're leading people. We're not leading automatons, and that's something we have to remember.
Absolutely. What's the next thing? So we see people, then what's the next topic that we cover?
We talk about acting with integrity, and the way that we define integrity for the purposes of our talk, the way that I define it for them is the ability to discern right from wrong, independent of your biases, fears, prejudice, and loyalties. So we acknowledge the fact that as human beings, we have biases, fears, prejudice, and loyalties, and those things influence us all the time in subtle and not so subtle ways. And integrity requires, or in order to act with integrity, it requires that we're able to pierce the veil of those blinding justifications and see the right thing. And it's so difficult sometimes. I mean, we have the power to justify our behavior at about 2,400 words per minute. And that happens at a level below conscious awareness. So, if I decide, here's a simple, just kind of innocuous example. I decide, I'm eating clean, I'm on a good diet, I'm training for a competition or something, and then I decide I want an ice cream. And I have the power to tell myself a story that makes eating that ice cream not only seem like the right thing to do, but almost inevitable. I can, right? I can just stack up the justifications. Same thing. You think about, I've got a sense, I'm seeing my wife as a person, as we talked about in the first trait, and I have a sense that, gosh, I should gas her car up for her, right, before I take her car back home. And if I do it, that's where the story ends, right? But if I don't do it, I'll start just stacking up these justifications. Well, she didn't gas my car up for me. I'm running late. I'm a very busy person. If I do this, I'm going to be enabling her. I can say all of these things that make me seem really righteous and her seem kind of more horrible than she really is.
Right.
And it makes the world seem right. So integrity is so important, for an effective leader to be able to recognize that tendency that we all have and then course correct for it. And integrity is the way by which we accomplish that.
Yeah, no, integrity is a core component. It was like when I had a discussion on a podcast. I don't know if you know who Pat Fitzgibbons is.
The name sounds familiar.
CJ Evolution podcast.
Ah, yes, I do. That's why it sounds familiar. I've actually been on Pat's podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
So Pat, we did it. Pat and I actually, funny story that it's funny that we're talking about leadership. When Pat called me to be on his show, he's like, "What are you going to talk about?" I was like, "Let's talk about leadership."
Yeah.
One of the pillars that I talked about, integrity was one of those pillars. Without integrity, you kind of lose the foundation of everything else.
Yeah.
There's nothing there to stop a downward slide. It's kind of the core found for me anyway, for my personal. That was and the only reason I say that was because at the beginning of my leadership journey, I was lacking in that trait, that skill set, and it was a very learned thing for me. You learn very quickly if you don't show integrity, the consequences build up very quickly.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Pat has a really good program there on CJ Evolution. I really enjoyed my visit with him as well.
Yeah, Pat's good people. Yeah, I do a lot of awesome stuff with Pat. So, seeing people, integrity. What's number 3?
Oh, effective leaders act with humility is something we cover. So we talk about humility. We define it basically as radical self-awareness. You know, the ability to just realize that you're limited, you're bounded as a human, and you can't have all the answers. You know, indeed, no one expects you to have all the answers. And you have to get really intensely curious about people. And, you know, this invitation that you have for folks to correct you and to approach you and to know that you're open to feedback. It's incredibly important. All the best leaders that I've worked with, you know, some big names, they tend to espouse this aspect of effective traits, right? This effective trait, this acting with humility. That's a characteristic that just tends to be common across those leaders, regardless of their domain, right? Be it corporate, military, nonprofit, you know, law enforcement, whatever space they're leading in. Effective leaders tend to have some degree of humility. So I really push that. We talk about that a lot in the course.
Absolutely. What is the conversation that surrounds that when you have officers in your course and you're trying to be like, hey, because that's a tough one for some guys, right? Like, hey, here's, you know,
yeah.
we want you to take it down a notch.
Yeah. Well, it's not as tough conceptually. I think people understand at a conceptual level that humility is really it's like a superpower. But where it becomes tough is in practice, because again, I think we create these images of ourselves, these self-justifying images. Like we see ourselves in certain ways, and then we feel the need to respond negatively to anything or any person that threatens our self-image. And that's dangerous, you know.
Yeah.
We can't get too overly invested with or overly invested in an identity, a caricature of ourselves.
Yeah. Interesting. Really interesting. Seeing people, integrity, humility. What's next?
Yeah, so effective leaders invite accountability.
Accountability.
So we talk about what is accountability, the difference between holding someone accountable and training, equipping, and preparing them to be accountable. You know, when you seek to hold people accountable, what you actually do is you steal away their agency. You steal away from them their ability to do their best. Again, you're relying more on that compliance metric than the commitment, the idea of commitment. And so what we want to do is we want to prepare people to be self-accountable, so that, again, they're going to do the work and accomplish the mission even if the positional leader isn't there. It's like you're really teaching them to be a leader. They lead themselves, right? I mean, it's like they're accountable to themselves, to the mission. And that's what we're after, really, is that accountability piece. And then at the strategic level, we talk about this idea that we want to build in systems of accountability around us as leaders to compensate for our flaws, our fallibility. So I'm going to surround myself with people who are willing to think in contrarian ways about my plans. They're willing to question again and to offer alternatives and to engage in devil's advocacy. And those systems are really important too. Again, these are human beings that populate these systems, and so we're going to have all kinds of mistakes. You know, I've executed between 2,500 and 3,000 high-risk tactical operations in my career. I've never executed a perfect one. It's never happened. I don't know if that's been your experience in the service or not.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, perfection is, you can strive for perfection, but if you, like you said, if you're accountable to yourself, you realize like, hey, we could have done better here.
Yeah.
And I think that's always a real interesting conversation to have with people, because you want them to have the mindset that it's never good enough.
Yeah.
I want you leaving training thinking, I need to do more. I want to learn more. I want to be more. Accountability is massive. I love that.
Yeah. We get a lot of good discussions in class around accountability, both the strategic and the personal level. One piece that I don't normally get into tactical applications. I generally tend to think that the leaders that I'm talking with are the experts in what they do, and I center more in on how they are with people and what they do. You know, how do you show up with others in what you do? But I give them a kind of a little tactical application of an accountability measure. I talk about when we're dealing with employee misconduct, which is something that's it. We can have a whole conversation on that, right? The ways in which we engage proactively or productively in those conversations, and then ineffectively in those conversations. But I give them a little tactical tip about ensuring they're in the right conversation. You know, how to separate the person from the problem, be hard on the problem, soft on the person, and then how to know, again, am I talking about the content of a violation? Am I talking about the pattern that's being established? Or am I talking about the fact that this person is no longer keeping their word and honoring their commitment to do the right thing? You know, which conversation am I in? How do I engage in each of those conversations to ensure the right outcome, or the best outcome we could have?
So after we've talked to them now about humility and accountability and beaten them down with that, and they're like, oh, crap. What's the next step in developing that leadership model for you?
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about transparency, which is huge, again, for leaders. And that requires humility. You see these things kind of tie in, right? Transparency requires humility. But, in today's age, you're transparent whether you want to be or not. I mean, it's pretty much, right?
Not an option anymore.
It's not really an option. Yeah, people talk about it like it's a virtue.
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm going to be transparent. Oh, yeah, you're going to be transparent because you're in this environment. But we talk about being intentionally transparent, and this idea that, the more information we can share with folks, the better. We want them to know our thinking. So it's not enough for me to say to you, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this. It's more like, this is the plan we've devised. Here's my thinking behind the plan. Here's what's gone into this decision. And you kind of share that. And then another thing that I talk about, kind of like a pro tip, is, I embrace the philosophy of radical inclusion. I don't have closed-door meetings unless they're about evaluation or discipline. Every other meeting is open to anyone to come. Now, you may not speak if you're not on the agenda due to time constraints, but you're open to observe. You're open to be in the meeting. So we don't hide that from people. Even my leadership team meetings are open to everybody. And I find that to be a really good way to control rumors, a really good way to let people kind of see kind of behind the curtain and understand a little bit more about the process. And then also it's developing them. Because as they're sitting there shadowing those meetings, they're seeing, okay, this is the kind of stuff I need to be able to negotiate and contend with if I'm going to step into a positional leadership role. So, all the way around, I think transparency is really good.
If you talk to anybody who's done any training with me or with ILET or with anything, they're sick of the word transparency, because I bring it up in every conversation. Being transparent. And I'm gonna take it to a different direction too, with law enforcement and the application from a command level. When we ran the 2020 ILET Summit, we ran it July last year. We had like 10,000 officers from like 76 countries on it. And when we started promoting it, so we ran it in July. When we started promoting it in June, I would get these messages back, or we'd put a Facebook thing out there. And obviously it doesn't hit 100% to the people that you want. So we're getting people leaving comments on there. And the first thing that we sent out was like, get your free ticket to this law enforcement conference or whatever, right? Yeah. And the first comment back was like, the only free ticket you're gonna get is a speeding ticket. And then it was like, what are you teaching cops to do? How to kill people and get away with it, and all these things. And I sat there and I'm like, well, I could take this like one of three ways, right? One, I could take it a bad route, which we're not gonna do.
Sure.
I could ignore them, right? Which, okay, status quo, I guess, which is probably the approach that a lot of people are taking right now. I chose to go a different route, and I reached out to each and every person that messaged us, and I directly messaged that person. I said, hi, my name's Adam. I'm running this event, I would personally like to, and these are civilians, I would personally like to invite you to attend this event.
Yeah.
It's free for you. You come in, and I want you to see what we're training officers. I want you to come in and watch. I want you to see the conversations that are happening. I want to, and you know, obviously there was trolls. Those, we don't worry about them. There's people that just didn't care, but there was a handful that took advantage of it. And I'll tell you what, the conversations that I had after that conference with those people was like, wow, thanks, I had no idea. And it's like, I don't know why agencies are so scared to say, hey, this is what we're training our officers. It's not like we're teaching secret squirrel stuff in a basement, like burn the tape, can't share it.
Yeah.
There's certain tactical and operational things that we don't share, but for the most part,
sure.
Why can't we be more transparent with how and why we do certain operations? Yeah. And anyway, that was an approach that I took with the event, and it was probably the smallest drop in the bucket when it comes to mending, you know, relationship with the community. But imagine if everybody did that.
Yeah.
And if everybody was transparent with it, it was like, hey, you know, it was an interesting kind of segue to what you said there.
No, I like that. And, you know, one of the tips I give students is, look, be honest, or at least don't lie. And what I mean by that is, you know, be transparent and tell people the truth. Share with them what you can. If there's something you can't share with them, like the stuff that you talked about, right, the details of tactical operations, just tell them why you can't share it. Just explain to them, hey, look, there's going to be aspects of this plan that we won't make public, and here's why. We're concerned about the safety of the people conducting the operation and the safety of the people we're trying to help. It would be irresponsible for us, maybe unethical for us, to share something like that. But everything else, we're going to go ahead and be open about. We're going to share with you because we want to be transparent. And again, I know that word, we're probably come up with a new word because it becomes so trite. Yeah. You know, we're very limited or bounded by our language.
Which is crazy because I think, and you'd please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the English language has more words than any other language in the world.
Oh yeah, why I couldn't correct you because I'm not sure, but that sure sounds
somebody
plausible.
will. Because this will be on YouTube, so somebody's going to be on there being like, no.
It sounds plausible though.
Well, I mean, think about how many, like, you know, we have so many words that mean so many different things, and then we have 18 words for the same thing.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Anyways, that's a rabbit hole.
No, I think that's fascinating. You know, I'm just not familiar enough with other languages to be, you know, to make an educated, you know, assumption about whether or not we have more or less. But yeah, I mean, it's.
Have you ever seen that? There's a, I think it's a video. It's probably on Facebook. They use a certain expletive starting with the letter F.
I've seen that.
They're like, the amount of applications that word has. Yeah. Very, very funny.
Even your intonation, I mean, you can change the meaning of the word by how you say it and what syllables you emphasize.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so now we've covered transparency, accountability, humility, seeing people, and am I missing one? Integrity.
Yeah.
Okay, 5. 2 to go.
So building trust. Effective leaders build trust. And I recommend, I actually picked this up from General Stanley McChrystal, this metaphor. I recommend approaching trust building like he recommends approaching leadership, which is as a gardener. You know, you're nurturing, you're tending, you're building, you're growing trust, right? That's the idea. I love that gardener metaphor. Because one of the things that I extend that a little bit in my course, and I ask people, what do you have to do to get weeds in your garden? And of course, the answer is nothing, right? If you do nothing, weeds will grow in your garden. It's the same thing with trust. If you do nothing to proactively build trust, people will naturally lean toward distrusting. The less you communicate, the less you share. You know, we have this negativity bias we all operate with it. I think it's an evolutionary feature that keeps us alive. You know, it's the reason that you driving down the highway, you're getting mad at people for rubbernecking a wreck across the median. But when you get up there, you turn and look too, right? No matter how much it frustrates you when other people do, you're going to do it because we're alive to negativity. We pay attention to gossip. We pay attention to rumors. You know, we have a heightened sensitivity to that. What's the same thing here? If I don't constantly work on building trust with folks proactively and tending to that, then weeds are going to creep in. People are going to make their own assumptions. They're going to draw their own conclusions. And so I have to be real intentional about that. And one of the ways I give them, again, a tip, one of the ways that I talk about building trust is defending those who aren't present. So when people start running other people down, instead of jumping on that bandwagon, even if there might be some things you might agree with that they're saying, right? You might agree with them on some points. Don't be tempted to jump into that conversation in a negative way. Instead, defend the person. Something like, listen, man, I know Tom. If Tom's really having a problem like that, maybe we should go talk to him and see if we can help. And you're sending a clear message to those folks. One, they're in the presence of someone with character. But two, you're also letting them know you defend them. If they were on the receiving end of that gossip, you're actually building trust. So what we want to do is we want to talk to people, not about them. That's kind of the theme there. And again, that's a way to help build trust. And then making commitments and following through on them is huge. Go out of your way to find things you can commit to for the team and then follow through on them. Start small, little commitments, things that are easy, and then build from there. Find out what is keeping people up at night. Find out one problem you can solve for them and solve it. And that's going to get you on the way to building trust. And you'll find that trust, if you work on it proactively and you stay on top of it, it compounds. You'll get much more in terms of return than you do in investment.
First thing that jumps to mind from an instructor perspective is, say you're running a DT class and the class breaks for lunch or it breaks for the day and you're sitting in the room with your other instructors and then the conversation starts. Oh, hey, Bob is, what the hell?
Yeah.
Well, he's screwed. Like, there's no way. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but he's always been like that, and da 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 da.
Yeah.
And it's that conversation amongst instructors.
Yeah.
And even though you think it's closed door, it's like, again, going back to the integrity. And now trying to build trust within your instructor group and be like, hey, man, if he sucks, that's on us.
Yeah.
That's not him. That's us. That's a failure on us.
Yeah. To a great extent, that's true. I mean, there are going to be people you run up against sometimes that.
Well, there's special people.
Well, actually, it's a corporate effort. It's a relationship between a trainer and a trainee, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's effort required on the part of both people. Right? I mean, the trainer's responsibility is to train and give the best of themselves and facilitate an environment that sets this person up for success. But then the trainee has to also take that knowledge, apply it, and do the hard work. You can't do the work for them. But to your point, whether it's a personal decision or some type of a intellectual challenge that they're having, maybe it's a competency issue, whatever it is. For us to then, disparage them over it is really pointless. I like the idea of considering or putting the most weight on you as the trainer, the most responsibility for this person's success. And the reason I like that is, although it is a corporate effort, that's something you control. It's your effort. So you're focusing on things you can do something about. You can do nothing about their capacity to learn, but you can absolutely address your ability to teach, your ability to share. So I really like that idea.
Because you're accountable.
You're accountable, right. Again, you're starting to see this theme that runs through all these traits.
Right.
And I noticed it too. And by the way, I didn't make these things up. These are things that I observed in effective leaders as I was striving to be a more effective leader, as I still continue to strive to be a more effective leader. I've got people in my mind, role models, people I think about. And these aren't perfect people. We're all a mixed bag. One of the worst things that we can ever do is take an idea and throw it away because it comes from a person that we don't particularly care for. Again, that's a really bad concept. It's a really bad way to operate. You really need to, again, separate the person from that concept. And is this concept worth struggling? Even someone that you don't particularly care for can give you some really helpful feedback if you're willing to listen. Matter of fact, they can test you in ways that maybe people that like you can't. So, I think that's real important.
Yeah, you see that in a conference here like ILEETA. It doesn't happen a lot at ILEETA, but even here, you walk out into that expo hall right now, you have companies that are in direct competition with one another. And there is a lot of that. Sometimes there's infighting, sometimes there's he said, she's, don't deal with that, whatever it is. But the way we've approached things always, it's, well, are they putting out good training content? Yeah. Or are they putting out good training content? Yeah. Then I'll take both. Wow, I don't want to do it if they're not doing it. Cool, then you can kick rocks and I'll take them. Because I want people that are willing to share and are open to other ideas, other points of view. There's nothing more powerful than sitting in or listening to a conversation with two people with opposing points of view that can have more of a debate where it's like a factual conversation where people don't get heated emotionally and they can actually debate and discuss topics, but then also accept like, oh, that's a great point. I never thought of that. I'm gonna have to now take that and combine that with what I know to now, and it'll help me grow my, it's not necessarily gonna change my mind, but it'll give me a separate reference point on a topic. And I think that's something that's very, it's lacking a lot with certain people. And that's one of the things that we're trying to push out is like, hey, listen, just be open. Be open to new ideas. Yeah. You know? Yeah. It's kind of like with, well, instructors especially, you know, there's people here, right? That it's this, I've been doing this way for 20 years. What, you know, cool, man. That's awesome. And what you do is awesome. But have you seen this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
I think the half-life on knowledge these days is probably about 7 years. So if you've done nothing to improve yourself in 7 years, you're probably halfway to irrelevant as an instructor.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's round it off, man. What's the last piece? What's the last thing that you leave your students with here? Yeah, effective leaders are good communicators. I mean, they're able to communicate effectively. You can't, it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have in your head. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are. If you can't effectively communicate intent and communicate information to people in a way that they can actually understand it, then you're not going to be able to, you know, to lead well. I mean, you may be able to talk about some theories or some things in abstract, but you're not going to be able to actually imbue people with practical information that they can execute. So, you know, it becomes even more important these days. You look at the complex nature of our environment. We've got chiefs and police commissioners and leaders that are being, you know, presented to the media, and the media are questioning them. And they're talking about all kinds of complicated issues like racism and police violence and all these other things. Those leaders have to be able to properly communicate, answer those questions, and be verbally agile enough to navigate those dangerous waters. Because, you know, in a world where everything's recorded and played back and taken out of context, I mean, you could be easily twisted up. So, you know, you really have to work on that. And communication is a skill. It's not something that, again, that comes natural for anyone. So, well, that guy's a natural communicator. Well, you know, they may have personality traits that dispose them to being more open, right? But I wouldn't say that without training and practice, anyone's going to be a great communicator. I think that's something you really have to work on. So we kind of round it out by talking about that, right? It's not only what you know, but what you're able to share. And you can see how important that is for trainers. I mean, how many times have you seen in your career, I grew up in the DT world, in the defensive tactics space. I met many fighters engaged in everything from MMA to you know, wrestling, you know, kickboxing, who were great fighters. They couldn't teach a lick. You know, they could not transfer the knowledge they had onto the students. And I got to tell you, and this is a pretty bold statement, but if I had to choose between someone who was a great fighter and a mediocre teacher, or someone who was a really mediocre fighter and a great teacher to run a DT class, I'm choosing the latter. Because the most important thing is that that trainer be able to impart knowledge onto those students so that the knowledge they'll be able to use. You know, and the hallmark for that trainer would be like, look, they could train people to do things better than they can do them. You know,
right?
the best players don't always make the best coaches.
No,
right?
No.
And so
look at Andy Reid with the Chiefs, right? Andy Reid did play, right, without a doubt. But I'm going to tell you right now, his current physical condition, he wouldn't have a chance on the football field. But his knowledge has grown so much from the time that he was a player and young and more athletic, right? So he's a great coach. He's a great strategist. And he can motivate and guide those players. But to your point, he doesn't have any place on the football field at this point in his life, right?
And I want to loop in the first point you made about knowing your people, seeing your people and knowing your people. As an instructor, realizing, well, first of all, being accountable to yourself, knowing, hey, maybe I don't know everything. This was something that happened to me in a DT class I was running. I had a student that was in the class who was a jiu-jitsu black belt. And we're teaching ground fighting. And I'm sitting there, and I know what's in the book, and I can handle myself, sure, and I can teach it.
Sure.
But I'm sitting there, and obviously I'm not over there telling him, help him. He's kind of off on his own doing his thing. and we're sitting there, and somebody asked a question that was outside of my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I called that student over and said, hey man, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
And I took a step back because I wasn't the subject matter expert anymore. But being able to understand that, having enough humility to know, hey man, that I'm sure I'm the instructor, but this guy is the subject matter expert, right? Give him the floor for the 2 minutes it took him to share one thing, which I was like, oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, and now I can take that, the next class we run, and I don't have him, at least now I can answer that. And it's that combination of traits that you said, right? And it's just, it's crazy how once you have these conversations and instructors get to learn, I understand what I'm tracking.
Yeah.
I'm tracking what you're saying. So I love that. I love that. So 7 traits for effective leadership. And what is it about ILEETA here for you why is it that you felt that was an important topic for you to discuss here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think it's an important topic everywhere. But again, I see trainers as leaders. You know, most of these trainers aren't going to be positional leaders, not going to be prescribed leaders, but they're going to be de facto leaders. I mean, there are a lot of times the first leaders that the folks we indoctrinate into the profession encounter, right? They're the role models, people looking up to, the people that are showing the way. I mean, I always say that you're constantly teaching and sometimes you talk. They're paying attention to what you do. And so, you know, these are all leaders that we're talking with, right? Regardless of rank. So I felt that was important to get across to them. And again, there aren't special leadership domains for prescribed or non-prescribed leaders. I mean, these things they're universal. And so I thought that was important. And then as far as ILEETA itself is concerned, you know, for me, the coolest thing about this is the diversity of experience, the diversity of opinion. You've got, you know, 5 or 6 different people teaching handgun retention, let's say. So what can I take from this system? What can I learn from this system? What are the interconnecting principles here? Are there foundational things that these systems share in common? And then why this over this? Well, you know, you get the instructor perspective, and it's a great dialogue. Some of the great conversations you hear on break in the hallways, right? Mm-hmm. People debating philosophies and stuff. It's really a think tank more than anything. And ILEETA, it creates an environment in which it's safe for instructors to come and share those differing perspectives. And I like to be part of that. I like to kind of be a fly on the wall, just kind of paying attention and soaking in as much as I can.
Chip, thanks so much, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.